This morning we're going to wrap up this series we've been in, You in 5 Years. And the first week, we kind of focused on the question, who? Who do I want to be 5 years from now? And is that where I'm heading? Who do I want to be by 2023? And if where I'm heading is not where I want to be, then really now is the best time to make a change, to take a turn. Then the second week, we asked the question, why? Why is it so hard to change? Why is it so hard to change? And we saw that the first law of motion, which kind of governs everything, also sort of governs the human heart, the human spirit. And it is in effect, the first law of motion makes it hard. Because an object at rest tends to stay at what? Yeah, and an object in motion tends to stay in motion. And so getting the right movements started is so critical. Small movements can actually lead to really big things. And then last week we asked the question, how? How in the world do we start to make real change in our lives? And the answer was very simply, one step at a time. One small step at a time, little by little by little over time. And today I want to close this by wrestling with the question, what? With the word what? What is it that leads to a life of brokenness and destruction? Like for instance, what leads some people to become drug addicts? What leads people to have affairs? What leads people to blow up their families? What causes people to rack up overwhelming credit card debt? Because I don't think that most people just wake up one day and say, you know what I want today? I want to blow up my life. I think I want to become a drug addict, or I think I want to get pregnant while I'm still in high school, or I think I'll have an affair and blow up my marriage and my family. People don't wake up one day and just decide to do this stuff, and yet it happens all the time. Happens all the time, and it happens to good people. It happens to people that have really good intentions. People that are intending to make good decisions. And so what is it that leads to that? And then on the other side, what is it that leads to a life of beauty and joy? Because we all know people that have come out of like extremely hard circumstances, broken families or severe poverty or like abuse or heartbreaking trauma. And you meet them and you would have no idea because they are filled with joy and hope and selflessness. Like despite their obstacles, their obvious obstacles, they have made brilliant decisions and they have accomplished in their lives extraordinary things. So what is it that leads to a life of beauty and joy? Now, some people just have a knack for making good decisions. They just have wisdom. Like despite hardships or obstacles, they fight through that and they consistently put themselves in a position to succeed. Other people constantly find trouble for themselves. And many of you have these kinds of people in your life, and you bail them out, and you bail them out, and you try to put them in a good situation, and you give them a fresh start, but it's a cycle that just repeats itself over and over and over. And so why do some people repeatedly make great decisions, and other people repeatedly make terrible decisions? And this morning, I know I'm completely oversimplifying this, but I think very often it boils down to the kinds of questions we ask. It boils down to the kinds of questions that we ask ourselves before we make decisions. So before we head down a certain path, we usually ask some questions first. And the kinds of questions we ask really determine what sorts of decisions we're going to make. The questions really frame the way we think about issues. And so let me give you a really common example that I've seen over and over again. In the realm of sexuality and in the realm of boundaries, sometimes questions arise. In fact, if you've ever been a youth leader, if you've ever been a youth leader in any capacity, would you just raise your hand for a sec? Oh man, look at all you guys. If you've ever been a youth leader in like a high school ministry, there is one topic that seems to come up over and over and over and over, and you dread it, and it comes up again anyway, and you dread it, and there it is again. When it comes to dating and being physical, the youth leaders get barraged with this question: how far is too far? right? How far is too far? Tony, how far can we go? How far, man, how far can we go? Like, can we make out? How about touching? Can we touch like this? Can we touch like this? How about this? Where is the magic line that we can get right next to, but then we shouldn't cross? How far is too far? How far can we go? I don't know about you. When I was a kid, we talked about this using baseball language. So there was first base, right? Second base, third base, and of course the home run. Do you guys know, do young people still use that kind of language? Is that like from the 80s, 70s? Do young people still use that kind of language? All right, so some of you may not be that familiar with it, so little quiz. What is first base? What is first base? What? Okay, I'm going with the youth leader. He says kissing. Yeah, I agree with that, okay? When I was growing up, first base was kissing, okay? And then let me jump ahead a little bit. A home run is what? Sacks. Okay. And so I was thinking about doing this with you guys, and I was going to like walk through all the bases. And then I decided like, oh man, that might not be a good idea. Because you actually don't want to say that stuff out loud in church, right? Like, you know, once you get past first base, the other thing is, I don't think there's a lot of agreement on this. First base, kissing, home run, we know what that is. But when you start getting around second base and third base, it gets a little hazy. What happens at third base? I don't know. You're married. I don't know. So thankfully, I'm not going to make you shout that out in church, but if nothing else, if today's message offers nothing else, and there's nothing else to talk to after church, at least you can talk to somebody about what you think the bases are. But I think we all understand there's a progression, right? And what we tend to ask at every step, every base is this: is there anything wrong with this? Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with this? How far is too far? How far can we go? And this can be, at times, like the hot topic, right, in youth groups. And of course, the Bible is like maddeningly silent on the topic. The Bible says that sex is fantastic, that God made it, that husbands and wives should offer themselves freely to one another, that it's an important part of loving and serving your spouse, and it should be fun, and it should be intimate, and it should be enjoyable. It honors God, but it's designated for marriage. The Bible doesn't say, but before marriage, there's all this other stuff you can do. You can touch like this, and you can do this, and you can do this, and you can do this, but don't do that, and for heaven's sakes, whatever you do, don't ever, ever do that. And it's interesting to me over the years because several different youth leaders that I've been around have different approaches to like try to help kids wade through these waters. Some of you may have heard these. Some of them are really conservative. Other ones, like, not so much at all. I had a roommate in college when I was up at Western that got advice from his youth leader, and he sort of lived by that advice. He was dating, and so the advice was, just stay vertical. Don't get horizontal. Okay, so essentially don't lie down with each other. So if you're watching a movie, sit up. Okay? If you're making out, stay upright. Okay, stand up or sit up. Whatever you do, don't get horizontal. So I was like, well, maybe that's helpful. The problem that I have with that one is, like, guys, there's a lot of stuff you can do staying vertical. I mean, if you want to get creative, it doesn't really limit you all that much. And so I'm not saying that it's not good advice on some level. I'm sure that it really helped him and it helps people. It certainly doesn't solve the issue of how far is too far. Okay, another one that gets thrown around a ton in more conservative Christian circles is this one. This is a good one. It goes like this. Well, Just imagine that Jesus is sitting next to you. And then you do whatever feels right and natural to you. So say to kids, like, just go for it as much as you would if Jesus was like sitting right next to you on the couch. And so, just envision Jesus watching everything. You're holding hands and you look over and there's Jesus. And you're hugging and over your boyfriend's shoulder, Jesus. And so whatever you're thinking about doing next, if Jesus was right there and you'd be comfortable with it, then just go for it. And I look at that guy, I don't know about you. For me, that cuts out pretty much everything. And again, this is something that people have used, and I'm sure that it's been helpful at some point. I'm not in love with this one. For me, the problem with it is it kind of makes Jesus creepy. I mean, the idea of Jesus just sitting and watching everything, it's creepy. And it makes Jesus a big downer. And I mean, it's true, of course, Jesus is with us everywhere. We're not, he sees everything, right? But the other thing is, I'm like, I don't know that this equips kids for marriage very well, because you get used to this image, and then you're married, and Jesus is still there. I mean, it may not be a real helpful image for marital intimacy. So, what's the answer? How far is too far? And to tell you the truth, I can't tell you that, and nobody can. But I can tell you this, I think the way that we frame the question matters. And essentially, the question in this context is being framed this way. Is there anything wrong with this? Right? Is there anything wrong with this? How far can we go? How far is too far? Is there anything wrong with this? Well, is there anything wrong with this? Well, there's anything wrong with this. How about this? And what the question enables us to do then is to say, where's the absolute limit? How close to trouble can I get without crossing over? Where's the edge of the cliff? Because I want to dangle my toes right over that edge. So what if we framed the whole concept, the whole issue with a different kind of question? What if instead of asking, is there anything wrong with this? So how far can we go? What if we were asking, how can we best honor and glorify God in the way we handle physical intimacy prior to marriage? What's the most God-honoring way to handle physical boundaries? And most of us didn't ask those questions. I certainly didn't, and my life has been a reflection of the choices I made. But those kinds of questions set us on a very different path. And when it comes to choosing our paths, our questions really do frame issues for us. We ask questions like, is this a sin? How far is too far? Ultimately, what we're asking is there anything wrong with this? And I think we all know this isn't just students that are dating. This isn't about high school kids. We tend to apply this thinking and this question to every arena of life. Is there anything wrong with buying this new car? Is there anything wrong with it? Even though the old one works just fine and I have no payments right now? Is there anything wrong with going to lunch with my coworker? My very attractive opposite sex coworker? Even though I'm married? Even though he's married and has 3 children? It's not a sin to go to lunch, is it? Is there anything wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with emailing him when I get home? There's nothing wrong with that, is there? It's okay if I email him when I get home? How about buying him a birthday gift? Anything wrong with that? Anything wrong with when we go to lunch together telling him all about my troubled marriage? Anything wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with going out with everybody after work? Is there anything wrong with having a beer? How about 2? How about 3? How about 7? I mean, when it comes to alcohol, how far is too far? And what we tend to do, and this is natural human instinct, is to ask, is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with watching this kind of movie? Is there anything wrong with visiting this website? Is there anything wrong with Facebooking my ex, even though both of us are married now? Anything wrong with reaching out and rekindling a relationship there? See, we tend to ask, is there anything wrong with this? And this is so natural. that it's kind of difficult, actually, to envision asking another kind of question. But the questions that we ask will completely frame the issues for us. In Scripture, Paul wrote a lot of letters guiding his friends, his new Christian friends. And they, in many ways, were very similar to us. I mean, the context they were living in was very tough, and it was complex. And in their culture, rejecting the way of Jesus was not only acceptable, it was encouraged. It was very similar to the context that you and I live in. And to the Christians in Corinth, Paul was writing about this freedom that they have in Jesus. And he wanted them to live in that freedom, but he wanted them to live in that freedom wisely. And so here's what he wrote. He said, we are allowed to do all things, but not all things are good for us to do. We are allowed to do all things, but not all things help others grow stronger. Now, he's not saying that there's like no such thing as sin. He's not saying all things are completely God-honoring. He's just saying that as Christ followers, we aren't anymore bound to this strict list of do's and don'ts. And he's also saying that just because something might not technically be a sin, just because it passes the "is there anything wrong with this" test, doesn't mean that it's a good idea. Doesn't mean that it's a good thing to do. And along these same lines, he says in Ephesians to his friends in Ephesus, he says, so be very careful how you live. Be very careful how you live. Do not live like those who are not wise, but live wisely. And again, he's saying, as a follower of Jesus, you have so much freedom. There's so much that's not black and white for you. Life with Jesus isn't about a checklist. You have great freedom, but use that freedom wisely. Live wisely. Make wise decisions. And these two verses lead us to what I think is so much better question. A question that really can serve as the backdrop for any decision we're making on anything at any time. And so instead of running our decisions through the filter of, is there anything wrong with this? Maybe a better question is, what's the wisest thing for me to do? What's the wisest thing for me to do? And this question really frames things differently. Like, is it wrong to go to a bar with all my old friends? Well, no. But for you, given your history with your old friends, is it the wisest thing for you to do? Is it wrong to make this big purchase? Well, no, but is it the wisest thing? Is it wrong to go on a date with this guy? No, it's not wrong, but is it the wisest thing for me to do? Is it wrong to be a Mariners fan? No. But is that a wise thing to do? Yes, right now it is. It is. And if you're looking at your phone, checking the score, stop it. And this is a question that we can ask and about every arena of life, a filter that we can run things through. And I think what this question does is it helps us cut through the fog of self-deception. It helps us cut right to the tendency that we all have to justify stuff. And it helps us get to the heart of the issue. And this isn't, the issue isn't, is this a sin? Is this wrong? Is this evil? The real issue is simply, is this truly wise? Is this a helpful step taking me to my desired destination? Is this decision going to ultimately lead me to the place I want to go? And really, for all of us, what's cool about it is that it's a deeply personal question. Like, what's the wisest thing for me to do? For me to do? Because what might be wise for you, it might not be wise for me at all. And what might be wise for me might not be wise for you. What's the wisest thing for me to do? And I have to think very personally about this. Now, obviously, there are certain things that are just black and white. There are things that are not good for anybody. Let me just say, it's never a good idea to smoke crack. If you're thinking about it, you're like, I don't know, is there anything wrong with that? Well, it's never a good idea to smoke crack. I don't care who you are, it's a bad idea. Sleeping with someone else's spouse, it's always bad. And so I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of gray areas. a lot of gray areas. Things like boundaries in dating, things like alcohol and consuming alcohol, things like financial management, making big purchases, things like moving my family to a new area, uprooting to take the new job. And when it comes to this kind of stuff, what's wise for one person may be completely not wise for another. And so I want us to consider some factors in what's wise. And essentially, I want to give you a three-pronged grid to run your decisions through. Three variations on our question, what's the wisest thing for me to do? And the first part of the grid is this. What's the wisest thing for me to do in light of my past experiences? And this is where you have to be really honest with yourself. To be able to say, okay, in light of my history, in light of my wiring, in light of the areas where I know I'm susceptible, in light of my predispositions, what's the wisest thing for me to do? And so the point of this is to look backward honestly and say, okay, yeah, I know how I operate. When I get with this group of people or this group of guys, I know that this tends to happen. We have this history together, and when I'm with these people in this setting, history tells me what I tend to become, what I tend to do, what I'm like. Or sometimes it's just what goes on the inside of us. I know that when I get with this person or with this group of people under these conditions, I get really negative, or I get very critical, or I become very judgmental, or I get really arrogant, or I get really competitive with everybody. And so maybe I should avoid those contexts based on my history. Or maybe it's I've noticed that every time I'm given this kind of opportunity or put in this kind of position, I just let my ego and my pride and my competitive nature just flare up. And I'm not very loving toward anybody. I start celebrating when they fail. And what's going on inside of me isn't good at all. Or maybe it has to do with, for you, it's like credit cards and spending. You're like, should I go to the mall? And the answer for you is always, yes. Go to the mall because you don't have a problem. So you know what kind of environments are too much for you. And so you need to set some boundaries. Or maybe there are things that are totally okay for you, things that would be very troubling for other people. Maybe you're one of those unique people that can have junk food all around you. And it's no problem. And you're just able to consistently make healthy choices. There's all the really good stuff there, and you're just I'll take this celery. God bless you, because you don't struggle with that. When Jen and I started dating, I used to listen to a lot of an artist. I don't know, I haven't heard her name much for a long time, but I used to listen to a lot of Tori Amos. Any of you, does anybody kind of remember? A few of you? Okay. She's not a Christian artist. And some of you just mentioning that, you're like, wow, really? She could be kind of vulgar, and she used some really dicey language and had graphic lyrics and a lot of anger, rage in her music. And I used to have it on all the time, and Jen would be like, why do you listen to that? Why do you listen to that? But for me, internally, this angry graphic stuff, it impacted me, but in the right way. It actually enabled me to feel the ache of God's heart for her and for people like her that had been through some of the same stuff. She had this album called Little Earthquakes. And to me, I'm telling you, it was musical genius. I was like, man, this is so good. But on this album, she just bore her soul. And her story, I came to find out, and this is what made it compelling for me, I think, is that she was raised in a pastor's home. She was raised in a conservative Christian environment, pastor's daughter. And somewhere along the way, she had had a terrible experience with the church. And so she was irate with the church and with Christians, and all this hatred and anger would come out in her music. And then on top of that, in her adolescent years, I think, she'd been raped. And so there was all this hurt and confusion and rage, and all this was coming out in her music, and it was filled with all of this emotion. And for me, it affected me. But the way that it affected me actually drew me toward Jesus. I'd listen to all of her pain in the music, and I would just think about hurting people that had been through stuff that I can't even imagine. And I think about people that had been wounded by Christians over and over again. They had been wounded by Christians, or people that had been abused in some way, and because of that, they were angry with God, and my heart would break. And I just felt like God and I were on the same page when I would listen to that. But for Jen, when she listened to it, she's like, I can't listen to that. I'm like, that makes sense. It's different for you. She was wired differently from me. And her past was different. And so I can see how listening to that kind of music for her or for other people would have been really not good at all. And that's the thing. This stuff is like really, really personal. But it's important that we be honest about our past, that we realize what our weaknesses are, that we don't diminish our own tendencies, that we don't pretend somehow that we have strength that we actually don't have. Like if you have issues with websites, then you better set some boundaries. If you have issues with impulse spending, you need some boundaries. Okay, if you have past trouble with food, then you better be wise about how you structure your life. And I don't know what you struggle with, but my guess is you do. And so you have to be honest. You have to be wise. And often we're not. We just keep coming back to the same thing over and over and over again. There's a verse in Proverbs that, Brooklyn's in 5th grade. I'm thinking of these kids heading to camp. There's a verse in Proverbs that like my inner 5th grade boy just loves. It's so disgustingly graphic. Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. That's disgusting. I mean, you just imagine you're downstairs watching TV and little buddy walks in the room and hawks up something that you're just like, oh my gosh. So you're tired, it's nighttime, and you get up and you go to get the cleaning supplies and you get down there and it's gone. And you're like, little buddy, no, don't do that. It's a scriptural way of saying when we go back and we make the same mistakes over and over and over again, it's a pretty disgusting thing. What's the wisest thing for me to do in light of my past experiences? Okay, and then second, what's the wisest thing for me to do in light of my current reality? I mean, it could be your emotional state. Could be the season of life you're in. Could be a unique circumstance of life. I mean, how many of you have ever heard that it's like not a good idea to go grocery shopping when you're super hungry? You heard that? Yeah. What's the wisest thing for me to do in light of my current reality? Right? Your current reality is I'm starving and everything looks good, right? You spend thousands of dollars and come home and never eat it because it never looks good again. What's the wisest thing for me to do in light of my current reality? I have a friend whose dad passed away after a full life, and his mom was like devastated by the loss. And after a couple of months, she said, I don't need this big house. I just need to downsize. I just want to downsize. And my friend kind of took this idea into consideration with his mom, and he applied this principle, and he said, Mom, this is not the time for you to make a major change like that. You're grieving the loss of your best friend, your husband of 50 years, your lover, your companion, the man that you created memories with in this house. I'm not saying you can't downsize. I'm not saying moving is a terrible idea at some point. I'm just saying you're not in a good spot to be making another change or making a major decision like that right now. So let's give this a little time. I will help you with the house. I'll find people to help maintain it. We'll make sure that this is not overwhelming, but don't make another huge life change right now. What's the wise thing for me to do in light of my current reality? And maybe your station in life just sort of affects what would be wise for you. I mean, maybe you're getting a job offer that is ridiculous. The money and it's so much of what you're looking for, but it requires long hours or travel. And you've also got small kids at home. And so maybe you say, you know what, I've got years to make a whole lot of money and I've got years to travel, but I've only got one chance to be with my kids when they grow up. Well, what's the wise thing to do in light of my current reality? I found at times with Jen, like certain discussions and conversations we're having, they need to be postponed. We need to table them. Jen and I, sometimes we have something hard that we need to wrestle through. And it's better to say, okay, this is like really important. In fact, it's so important, we actually need to table this right now because I'm too mentally or emotionally exhausted to give this the energy it requires. 11:30 at night is not the time to start this conversation because of my current reality. Can we pick this up? Babe, can we pick this up tomorrow? Or I know that this is going to be an emotional issue for us. How about we wait until we've had dinner, right? Because it's not going to be good if we both go into this conversation with low blood sugar and we're hangry before we even start talking about it. What's the wise thing for me to do in light of my current reality? And then the last one is, what's the wise thing for me in light of my future hopes and dreams? Like you think about what you're really wanting. What is it you really, really want? What matters to you? What's really important? Well, you better be wise. Will this thing help you get to where you ultimately want to be? Will making this purchase, will going to this restaurant, will dating this guy, will skipping this class, will taking this promotion, okay, will going to this party, taking this risk, like in light of your future hopes and dreams, is this a wise thing for you to do? And I'll tell you guys one place that I eventually want to be. It's just like super important to me at the very top of my list. This week, Jen and I will celebrate our 21st anniversary. Yeah. And here's what I'll tell you. There are a lot of things in my life that I wish I could go back and do over. I have made a lot of mistakes. I have many, many regrets. The smartest thing I ever did was marry that girl. Yeah. Youth leader. And it hasn't always been easy. The first couple of years were really rough. I haven't been shy about talking about that. We didn't understand each other. We were mad at each other a lot. But we sort of learned how to fight together to get through it. And now here we are. We're coming up on 21 years. And over that time, there have been these moments, and this is going to sound like weirdly prophetic or something, but these moments where I look at her, and I get this strange sensation. It's almost out of body, but this vision will just sort of flood over me. And I see Jen sitting on a porch in one of those like old porch swings. Do you know what I'm talking about, like from the 50s? And she's old. In the vision, she's really old. But she is beautiful. She's beautiful. Just gray hair, leathery skin, but just gorgeous, right? Elderly woman. And I'm sitting next to her on the porch swing, and we're just rocking back and forth, and I'm even older than she is. And we're just sitting there sipping lemonade. And she reaches over and she grabs my hand, and it's just one leathery hand holding the other. But what's unspoken is that we've loved each other for a lifetime. We've raised kids together with incredible highs and incredible lows. And this last season has been that. And we've loved our grandkids. And we've loved our great-grandkids. And our I mean, we're really old. But we've walked through all this life together. And it's this weird thing because every once in a while I'll just look at her and I have this vision, and it's compelling to me. And this is my future hope. This is my future dream. And I want to be able to do that and look back over our life together and realize that we've done the entire thing together. And I want to put my wrinkled hand in her wrinkled hand and know that for better or worse, we tackled life together. That I shared my life with her. And barring an accident or illness or something, I really hope to get to that place someday. But for us to help ensure that we get there, over the years, we've set up all kinds of boundaries for ourselves. And there's a lot of people in our culture that don't get it. They're like, that's weird, man. I'm like, no, it's not. You should see the vision I have. It's not weird. We're very careful and we're very protective of our marriage. Many of you know we take Mondays off. We don't work on Mondays, but we spend our Mondays together. We spend them together, period. Now, would it be wrong to spend the day apart? No. But we're very intentional about taking that day and relaxing together. We go for long walks. We work on the yard together. We sleep in pretty regularly. We're very intentional about relaxing. We watch our TV shows together. We read. We go for drives. Sometimes we talk a lot. And some days we barely talk at all. And it's really quiet. But we're together. Every Monday, we're together, just together. And we also have all these boundaries when it comes to stuff with the opposite sex. So, like, I don't meet with women alone, like in some place where we can't be seen. I don't do it. It's always in a very public place, always in a coffee shop or something like that. And Jen always knows beforehand that it's going to happen, and then we check in with each other afterwards. Neither of us will ride alone in a car with a person of the opposite sex, unless there's like an emergency or something happens, and then we contact each other as soon as possible about that. Now, is it a sin for me to ride alone in a car with a woman of the opposite sex? Of course not. Of course not. But we're trying to be wise. Both of us have access to each other's email. Why? Because we're just like freaks that don't trust each other? No. I want her to have access to mine. She wants me to have access to hers so that there's just no temptation at any point to have some sort of secret life. And I know this stuff, of course, does not ensure that we're going to have a long life together, but it has helped. It helps. Is it inconvenient sometimes? Sure it is. Does it restrict certain kind of freedoms? Sure it does. But I'm convinced that it's worth it. When we first moved here to start the church, Kate, who's in college, just finished her freshman year at George Fox University. Kate was 4, and her little brother was 3, and we signed them up for T-ball at the YMCA. And so after their very first T-ball practice, middle of the summer, the guy that was coaching, who was just a dad coach that became coach at the practice, we showed up, and the lady from the Y is like, if you want to have a team, one of you has to coach. And I was like, and so he coached, and so after practice, we kind of hung around, and we're trying to encourage him, and we found out that he and his wife and his 4 kids had just moved to the area. He had just gotten out of the military, and so they were kind of looking for friends, and he was super friendly, and so we're trying to be really friendly back, and I'm envisioning being in his shoes, so I'm just asking him lots of questions about his life and what it was like in the military and why they moved and how it's been going and all of that. And eventually he started telling me about his job. I said, what do you do? And so he said, I got this sweet job. I'm so excited about it. I'm a drug rep for a drug company, and so I travel a lot, which is cool, and I go around all these places and doctors' offices and medical clinics and all that, and I try to get them knowledge about what these drugs can do for people, and I try to get them to prescribe them and buy them or whatever it is drug reps do. I don't know. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Now, I didn't ask this part, but he started telling me the drugs he was repping. And so he told me a couple things. I'm like, I don't know what that is. And then he said, yeah, and the biggest one that I'm really having a lot of success with right now is Levitra. I was like, huh. So then he went on like a 20-minute tirade of why Levitra is better than Viagra, why Levitra is better than Cialis. And he's like, just a sec, I'll be right back. I want to give you something. I'm like, is he giving me a sample? What? So he comes back, he's standing there, we're visiting, and he starts telling me more and more about it. He gives me his card and gives me all these brochures and stuff about Levitra, and I'm like, and then he kind of hits me on the chest. He's like, not like guys like you and I don't need it, And Jen's like, and then he says, and here's something, and he pulls out a pen for me. Guys, this is, 15 years ago. Pulls out a pen. It's a Levitra pen. I wish you could see it. But he's like, here, why don't you jot something down? And he takes the Levitra pen and goes, here. I'm like, dang, dude. So then, right after the whole pen thing, he's like, oh, anyway, so what do you do? I'm a pastor. And he's like, and you could see him go, oh my gosh. And he's just reeling the whole conversation back, which is one of the awesome things about being a pastor. So we were like, yeah, I mean, super friendly, outgoing guy, really nice guy. And we started hanging out with them, and him and his wife and their 4 kids, and they would invite us over to their house for birthdays and all kinds of stuff, and we got to know them pretty well. We were friends. And after a few years, this drug repping thing went really well, and so he was traveling a lot, and he was getting promoted and making more money, and he was gone more and more and more. And one day we went over to his house after, I think it was a birthday party, and so we're there, and he's in the dining room, and he introduces us to this very attractive woman, and he says, oh yeah, this is my mentor from work. And we're like, wow. He's like, yeah, we travel around everywhere, and then she kind of just is showing me the ropes, and I'm like, really? So you're gone all the time, and the two of you are traveling around everywhere? And Jen and I are like, huh, well, really nice to meet you. About a year later, he and his wife and their kids moved to Spokane. And we hadn't really heard from them. We didn't stay in touch very much. And one night we got a call, and it was his wife. Jen picks up the phone, and she can hardly breathe. And you can guess what's coming. And she said, Jonathan has left us, but maybe there's a way through this. Can you help us? And we were just like, no. There's just nothing we can do to help you with that. But to tell you the truth, and we didn't tell her this, we saw this coming years ago. But here's the thing about this guy. I don't think he woke up one day and said, I want to blow up my family. I want to live in a separate place from all my kids. I want to wound this woman so deeply that she can barely talk and breathe. He just continued to make decision after decision after decision, asking the question, is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with me taking a job where I'm traveling all the time? Is there anything wrong with me kind of getting disconnected from my wife? Is there anything wrong with me starting to talk more and more and more with my female coworkers? Is there anything wrong with going to dinner with them? Anything wrong with emailing them? Anything wrong with buying them gifts? Anything wrong with showing them some level of affection, office level? And it didn't set him up well. And I think about him, and I think if he had ever stopped along the way and asked, is this the wisest thing for me to do? That whole thing could have been headed off so easily. And there's so much on the line with these things. And the questions are so simple. But where they lead us is vastly different. We're wrapping up this series, You in 5 years. And where do you want to be in 5 years? Who do you want to be? What kind of marriage do you want to have? What kind of family do you want to have? What kind of vocation? What kind of character do you want to have? Because if you continually ask yourself the question, is there anything wrong with this before you do it, you're probably not going to get where you want to go. But in light of where you want to go, if you'll ask yourself, is this the wisest thing for me to do? It's extraordinary how that question paints everything in a little bit different light.